Mark Hoffman is considered one of the most accomplished forgers in history among those who have been caught. Hoffman is especially noted for his creation of documents related to both American history and the history of the Latter-day Saint movement. When Hoffman's schemes finally began to unravel and the walls were closing in, he decided to murder 2 of his close friends using homemade bombs. This is Below the Salt. Okay, are you ready to hear the wild tale of Mark Hoffman?
Ready.
Okay.
I know a teeny little bit about him, but I don't know details.
Okay.
So
I got deets.
ready.
All right, you ready for some sick deets?
Mhm.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so Mark Hoffman was a 6th generation Mormon. He was reared in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by devout parents. He was born in 1954. So he's a little bit like older than my parents.
Okay.
And
Like a boomer.
yeah, like a middle to late boomer. Yeah.
Okay.
So and he was actually a below average student. He wasn't like a particularly academic person.
And he became a forger.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was like super into his hobbies. He had a lot of hobbies.
Okay, that makes sense.
He didn't pay attention to his school because he was into his hobbies. That's kind of my opinion. He is a relatively intelligent person. Actually, a very intelligent person. To be able to pull
wasn't
this
worth
off.
his time to do the schoolwork.
Right, exactly.
I've been there.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have. So some of his hobbies were like magic, like magician magic, like sleight of hand,
like card tricks.
Yeah, like up close magic.
Yeah.
Card tricks, electronics, chemistry,
Interesting.
and stamp and coin collecting.
Okay.
So he's a huge nerd. Like he's not like even building model airplanes. This guy is like into the deep nerd.
Deep stuff.
Yeah. So he and his friends were also said to make bombs for fun.
Ooh.
Which sounds scary.
I think that's fun.
It sounds scary. I mean, I would be lying if I said I hadn't like put together a little thing and blown up a watermelon on the 4th of July.
Boys.
But like, it's true. But mine was just like, hey, take some powder from some fireworks and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it wasn't like making switches and any of this other stuff. I'm not on trial here. I'm getting dirty looks, I feel like. Yes, it is a boy.
Learned something new about you today.
It's kind of a boys
Boys
thing.
will be boys.
I guess. Which is your favorite saying. According to Mark Hoffman, when he was still a teenage coin collector, he forged a rare mint mark on a dime and was told by an organization of coin collectors that it was a genuine mint mark. So he kind of caught the forgery bug really early in his life when he was a teenager. And I love how like they probably interviewed him about this after everything went down.
Mm-hmm.
So like he's like bragging about how when he was a teenager, like
ass.
Yeah. He's like, yeah, I deceived a coin collecting organization when I was a teenager. It's like, who gives a crap? Anyway. So I'm gonna assume if he was born in '54, then in the late '60s, he spent 2 years as an LDS missionary in the England Southwest Mission. When he was in England, he enjoyed investigating bookshops and buying books related to the Mormon religious movement. Missionaries often kind of dig into like the nitty gritty of Mormon doctrine, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you kind of have nothing else to do on a mission.
Right? Yeah, on a mission, you're not allowed to read other things.
But you did anyways.
I did anyway? Oh, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Because I didn't give a crap about that. I thought it was a dumb rule. But that's just me. Yes, I actually did serve an LDS mission, so
yes.
little information for our listeners. And I broke the rule to not read other things.
That's messed up.
I know. I'm basically Satan himself.
But it sounds like Mark Hoffman was following the rules a little too much.
Kind of. He started I think the deeper he dug, the less he liked what he saw. Actually.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, actually it's a really common thing for people who leave the church to read up on church history and realize that it's a little bit different from the official church's stance on their own history. So a lot of people feel that's a deceptive practice, and they don't really like it very much. So he eventually returned home 2 years later, and in 1979 he married Dora Lee Olds, and they had 4 children.
It's a sick name.
Dora Lee Olds.
Dora Lee Olds.
Yeah, I imagine.
I feel like Olds is the last name that matches my soul.
Yeah, if you got an old soul.
Valerie Olds.
Yeah, Valerie Olds. I think Oldsmobile, I assume, is the person who invented the Oldsmobile.
That was my first car.
It is. Oh, that's precious. Okay. So, a year after he married Dora Lee, so I assume they didn't have too many children a year later. In 1980, Hoffman said that he found a 17th century King James Bible with a folded paper gummed to the inside, with like just kind of stuck in there, not like glued in, but just stuck. The document seemed to be the transcript that Joseph Smith's scribe Martin Harris had presented to Charles Anthon, a Columbia Classics professor, in 1928. This is extremely crucial, actually, to kind of it's kind of a pivotal event in church history. Joseph Smith apparently was looking for legitimization of his works, and he sent Martin Harris with this document to this Columbia professor, and the Columbia professor said, this is kind of just gibberish. I can't really understand it. It doesn't really make sense. And he's like, you'd have to give me more examples. I would have to read more of this book. And Martin Harris told him, the book is sealed because it's a long story. If you dug into Mormon doctrine and Mormon history at all, there's just all these books and plates and whatnot about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. So Martin Harris told him the book was sealed, and Charles Anthon says, I can't read a sealed book, so I can't really help you. That's considered prophecy, actually, by the Mormon Church, this moment, because there's a part in the Old Testament where they talk about how the learned men of the day will say that they cannot read a sealed book. And so, like, when Martin Harris returned to Joseph Smith and told him what happened, Joseph Smith said, oh, that's prophecy, because of this random, very obscure Old Testament reference.
I was just gonna say, isn't there like no prophecy about anything after the time that Joseph Smith was around, though? Or was there prophecy of stuff that has happened? This is like unrelated to what we're talking about today, but there's prophecies in the New Testament about the return of Christ, which would in theory be after the time that Joseph Smith was around. It's dubious at best. But anyways.
Yeah. Okay. So the fact that he said, "Hey, this is that little piece of Mormon history," of course, is going to get the church's attention, which was his whole point. So the LDS Church experts considered that transcript genuine, and they purchased it from Hoffman for more than $20,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's only like, what's he? He's like 30 some odd years old. No, he's 20. Like, he's like 26.
In the 70s,
and
they
1980.
got it for $20,000.
For $20,000, yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine getting $20,000 today.
But that's like just a piece of the little puzzle here.
God.
So he actually was offered more than $20,000, but he said instead of doing that, I think it was like 30. Instead of 30, let me get 20. And include several church artifacts that they had already in duplicate, including a $5 gold Mormon coin.
Weird.
Deseret banknotes, because when Utah was first a territory, they kind of started their own bank. And a first edition of the Book of Mormon.
Interesting.
Which seems kind of weird. Why would he want this stuff, right? Like, he obviously doesn't really care about history. So here's the interesting part. Hoffman drops out of college right then.
Where is he going to college?
I think BYU.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Drops out of school, and he used his earnings and the artifacts to launch a rare book dealership. So he was starting a company instead.
Okay.
Yeah. He soon fabricated other historically significant documents and became known for his quote-unquote discoveries of previously unknown Mormon history materials. So he's kind of just like taking this one really good forgery and just running with it, right? So these new materials that he found fooled not only church leadership but also document experts and historians, like secular historians, like completely unrelated. They thought it was completely genuine based on how he was forging it.
He was really good.
He was really good. Like, he knew the science. He knew, like, what kind of paper to use, because, of course, you would use the paper that they used back then.
He had
or maybe he'd even
too.
buy old paper and use
Interesting.
it. It's very, very... He knew what he was doing, for sure. So, one might ask, why would he focus on forging just Mormon history documents instead of, like, any document he wanted? Well, he also did forge other things, but his focus on Mormon history was motivated by his personal philosophies. He considered himself a quote-unquote closet apostate. So he was acting like he was still a full-fledged member of the church while internally not involved, not living by it.
And apostates are people that are no longer involved.
Yeah, people who were part of the church and have left. Yeah.
Like
so he's in the closet. Yeah. You're not in the closet, though.
No.
So he was motivated, first of all, by greed, because he had the access to the church here in Salt Lake City. But he also had the desire to embarrass the church by undermining church history, he said. Simply put, he was a massive narcissist. He was disillusioned by the Mormon church and wanted to, quote-unquote, punish the church itself.
Oh, brother.
So, like, it's not only is he going to make money, but he's kind of dig into something he deems bad. So in the early 80s, when he first started, a weirdly significant number of new and important Mormon documents came into the marketplace as a result of Hofmann's work. It seems a little bit coincidental. Like, don't you think someone would be like, hey, isn't it weird that we're suddenly finding all these things and they're just, That's why I think eventually the walls started closing in on him, because he can't do that forever.
It's like, and is he the one finding everything?
Yes,
like,
he is.
Hello?
Yeah, like, obviously it's just the guy finding it.
Spread it out a little bit, man.
Yeah. So, to make this sudden flood of Mormon documents seem plausible, Hoffman explained that he relied on a network of tipsters and had methodically tracked down modern descendants of early Mormons. So he, said that he started a little network, basically. Which I guess is somewhat plausible, but still, you think those early Mormons would have come forward earlier. So, sometimes the church would receive these documents as donations, and others it purchased directly. By donations, the church would actually have a third party buy the goods on their behalf and sell it to the church to add layer of deniability.
That doesn't sound cool.
It sounds super sketchy, right?
Yes,
it's
that
because
sounds so shady.
He was making all these documents and he was trying to make it look bad. So the church didn't want to look bad, so they would have someone else, a third-party person, buy it on their behalf, and then they would buy it back.
Great.
Yeah. Oh no.
Oh no.
Let me keep going.
Am I gonna just be mad today after this?
A little bit, but there's some fun like cosmic karma at the end.
Okay, that's good.
But yeah, it's really frustrating. Let's see. According to the Ostlings, who are some of the experts on the Mark Hoffman case who wrote a book about it, the church publicized some of the acquisitions. It orchestrated public relations for some that were known to be quote-unquote sensitive. Others it acquired secretly and suppressed. The details of many of these documents are interesting, but they are lengthy. There's just a ton of them, so I don't want to get into them because there's just so many. There are some highlights that I'll hit here in a moment. To sum up, most of them were potentially embarrassing for the church regarding its own history. When they purchased them, the Mormon church would often lock them up in a literal vault. And sometimes Hoffman would still leak the details about these documents anyway, forcing the church to come clean about what they had bought from Hoffman. So, kind of interesting. He was kind of playing both sides.
Interesting.
So the most notorious of all these documents, and this is the one you'll hear about in the news, is the salamander letter. Have you heard of the salamander letter?
I don't think I actually have.
Okay.
I mean, it's possible that I've heard it mentioned and just has slipped in and out of my brain.
It's kind of weird.
Because there's a lot of letters, like you said.
Yes,
there's
a lot of stuff.
I hear about letters all the time.
Mm-hmm. So the most notorious of his LDS forgeries, LDS-based ones, he did have some other ones which I'll get into as well. It's called the Salamander Letter, and it appeared in 1984. So it's been 4 years of him churning out these documents, and, like, he's getting good. The letter presented a version of the recovery of the infamous Book of Mormon gold plates. It's... If you have time, just look into early LDS church history, and you'll know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
This version contrasted markedly with the church-sanctioned version of the events. Not only did the forgery make it clear that Joseph Smith had been practicing quote-unquote money digging through magical practices, which is what we call grave robbing, disturbing Native American burial mounds.
It's called magical practices?
Yeah, because he would use like rocks, like
like the seeing stones,
like seeing stone rocks, or like divining rods, or any number of magical practices. Because this is a time in American history where like that
people
magical
people
believed in that stuff, and they would use it.
I didn't know
So
that.
he would
That's
go
cool.
and he would find,
I wish I could get money with a seeing stone.
So he would have, yeah, right. Well, that's the grift, right? You know, like it's like you go to a farmer and say, hey, you have a ton of land here. I'm gonna go look and see if there's any buried Native American treasure or burial mounds, and I'm gonna use. And the way I can do that is with my special rock or whatever. So he's like, will you pay me so much to go look for it?
Interesting.
And he's like, yeah, if you can go find it, great. And he never,
and
of course,
didn't even look.
Then he'd just go fuck off, right?
Oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah.
Genius.
No, it's a smart grift for sure, but it is very illegal. And he was arrested for it several times.
Yeah.
The Salamander letter said he was totally doing that, and not only do the records of the courts at the time agree with that. But also, instead of an angel showing Joseph Smith where the gold plates were, a white salamander had appeared to Smith and showed him where the golden plates were. A white salamander had showed him where the plates are.
The hell?
Yeah, it's like, excuse me. So obviously the church was like, yeah, that's not what we tell people, so we're gonna buy that and
get rid of it.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Oh, just wait until
zombie Jesus.
Sweet zombie Jesus. Trust me. Wait until the church has to come clean about this one too, because he leaks the details. And just wait until you hear the mental gymnastics they use to get around it.
Gosh.
So after the letter had been purchased for the church and became public knowledge, Apostle Dallin H. Oaks, who is still to this day an apostle.
I mean, I can't say anything too bad about anybody that is alive on here, but fuck that guy.
Yeah, he's a particularly noted anti-LGBT member of the church leadership, and he's kind of a dick. Also, he served on the Utah Supreme Court for a while. Interesting. Dallin Oaks asserted to Mormon educators that the words white salamander could be reconciled with Joseph Smith's angel Moroni, because in the 1920s, the word salamander might also refer to a mythological being thought to live in fire, because the word salamander means that.
But it's still a goddamn giant fucking lizard.
Well, I don't know how big it was. It could have been a little lizard, but yeah, well. It's
not a salamander, it's a newt.
It's a newt. Yeah. So,
Jeez. Oh my god.
So,
this is just...
It's frustrating, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, a being that is able to live in fire is a good approximation of the description Joseph Smith gave of the angel Moroni, which, given the fraudulent context of the whole thing, the fact that he had to go through these mental loops makes this whole thing a pretty big stretch.
Ugh. I hate it.
Yeah, it's pretty painful to read. So in 1984, that same year, Gerald and Sandra Tanner, who are noted critics of the LDS Church, became the first to declare the letter a forgery. Critics of the church figured out that it was a forgery, despite the fact that it, as well as others of Hofmann's discoveries, would have strengthened the Tanners' arguments against the veracity of official Mormon history. Which is like super good of them to do. Like they're like,
Yeah.
hey, we want to fight the church on an even playing ground. We don't want to cheat using a forgery.
Yeah.
We don't want to.
But like, did it make people almost not believe them since they were already against the church? Were people like, oh yeah, like sure it's a forgery, or do people believe them?
At the time, people didn't believe it.
Okay,
but
that's
then
what I thought.
once everything came out about all the
Then
forgeries,
they're like, okay, I guess you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
and
that sucks.
actually, the salamander letter has there was a very real movement in the LDS Church to say that, hey, this whole salamander business has kind of put us off of the whole church. And in fact, one person cited the salamander as a reason for his suicide.
Oh my
So
God.
Mark Hoffman is carving a path of carnage through Utah at this point with his forgeries. So the Tanners were clearly interested in keeping the moral high ground there. And things are starting to turn now on Mr. Hoffman. I think he kind of stretched it a little too far with the salamander letter. So, in addition to Mormon documents, Hoffman also forged and sold signatures of many famous non-Mormons, including George Washington, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Daniel Boone, Mark Twain, John Hancock, Francis Scott Key, Abraham Lincoln, Paul Revere, and Button Gwinnett, whose signature is the rarest of the Declaration of Independence signers.
Interesting.
Because he didn't sign very many things, apparently. So, it's kind of like a greatest hits album of American history.
Yeah.
Like, he's just like, who are famous people from history? I'll forge their signatures. Yeah, it's totally suspicious that he would only find these. All right, so, as crazy as the whole salamander letter thing is, the biggest thing he ever tried to pull off was the Oath of the Freeman. Have you heard of the Oath of the Freeman?
I have not heard of this one.
Oath of a Freeman was the first document ever printed in America.
Oh.
With a movable typeset
Wow.
printer. They actually, when the first printing press came to the U.S., they had a big debate about what's the first thing we should print. It should be something. It should be something significant.
Yeah.
So the Oath of the Freeman is just a declaration that you're now American citizen.
Okay.
So when people would come to America and become a citizen, they would recite the Oath of the Freeman. So it was the first document to be printed in Britain's American colonies in 1639.
Wow.
Only about 50 copies had ever been made. And a genuine example was worth well over $1 million in 1985.
Wow.
So, Hoffman's agents began to negotiate a sale of his fake Oath of a Freeman for the Library of Congress. Okay, so the vultures are starting to circle a little bit for Hoffman, but he's trying to pull off this Oath of a Freeman scheme anyway. Despite the considerable amounts of money Hoffman had made from document sales, he was deeply in debt. In part because of his increasingly lavish lifestyle and purchases of genuine first edition books for his company. In an effort to clear his debts, he also attempted to broker a sale of something called the McClellan Collection, a supposedly extensive group of documents written by William E. McClellan, an early Mormon leader who had severed ties with the church. So, of course, it's something that the church would find controversial and therefore would guarantee a sale for him.
Yeah.
Hoffman hinted that the McClellan Collection would provide spectacular revelations unfavorable to the LDS Church. Unfortunately for Hoffman, he had no idea where the McClellan Collection was, nor did he have time to forge a suitably large group of documents before his debt was going to be called. The funny thing is, what?
You're funny.
Oh, I think I'm funny.
At your laugh.
Oh, it's just funny because you know where the McClellan Collection was?
No.
The church already had it.
Oh. That's good.
So he's just a dummy.
Dumb.
Okay. Hoffman's duplicity about his fraud and forgeries was discovered by an undisclosed purchaser of one of his false documents, who demanded to be repaid This was one of the people who was donating on behalf of the church. He was a very rich man up in Idaho somewhere.
Okay.
Details about him personally have not been revealed by police investigations.
Okay.
He demanded to be repaid upon pain of life, limb, and the safety of his family members. So he says, hey, if you don't pay me back for this garbage document that you sold me via the church, I'm going to come up there and kill you and your family. So
man, people just need to chill.
It's important to them. This is church veracity for them. So,
like, killing isn't okay like that, you know? Like,
it really isn't. You think like church people would be like not okay with the murder? Okay. So this party demanded payment within a number of days, with the McClellan sale not coming anytime soon because obviously he didn't have it, and the sale of Oath of a Freeman had been delayed by several days. This is the Library of Congress saying, hey, we're not so sure about this being legit. So they're on to him too. Hoffman needed a drastic excuse to delay his buyer. So his brilliant plan was to murder several of his close friends with bombs, hoping that the buying party would be understandable about a delay on his account of not providing the money, because he was going to a funeral, or being in hiding because he was considered another target of the bomb plot.
I don't think a guy who's threatened to kill you and your friends and your family is gonna care if you have to go to your friend's funeral.
No, he's not. And that's exactly what happened after the first bomb went off. So, it's not very good logic.
No.
He's panicking. He's a narcissist. He thinks that he'll be able to pull this off. He has just a total disregard for human life. He doesn't even care that he'll kill his friends to buy himself a couple days to get the money. Plus, he's not even probably going to get the money anyway. So, Hoffman began constructing mercury switch bombs. Hey, remember mercury switches?
Yeah, I remember mercury switches.
Any friends of yours use mercury switches on their bombs?
Yeah, Richard Worthless.
Richard Worthless. Oh, man.
Go back to and listen to our episode 2 and you can learn all about him and what a dick he was.
It was just the thing to do back in the mid 80s till early 90s. Make a mercury switch bomb.
I guess so.
So, on October 15th, 1985, he first killed document collector Stephen Christensen, who's the son of a locally prominent clothier, Mac Christensen. If you're here in Utah, you know all about Mr. Mac. That's where missionaries buy their suits before they go out into the world. And actually, Mac Christensen sadly passed away last week, I think. As of this recording, it's kind of sad. Yeah, he's a big deal. He's a big entrepreneur here in Utah.
Yeah.
So Stephen Christensen, who was his friend and fellow document collector, dies when he
blows him up.
Gets blown up by this homemade bomb. He tries to contact his buyer and ask him for more time, and the buyer's like, "Yeah, I'm not gonna give you more time." So later that same day, a second bomb kills Kathy Sheets, the wife of Christensen, the first victim's former employer, who were working together on an investment deal. So he was trying to frame that this bomb plot had something to do with this investment deal, and he was in on this investment deal as well. So he's trying to make it look like he's being targeted by killing these other people. So, as Hoffman had intended, police began to suspect that the bombings were related to the impending collapse of an investment business, of which Kathy Sheets' husband, J. Gary Sheets, was the principal, and Christensen his protege. What was that? Was that the dog?
She was falling.
She was falling. Oh my goodness.
She's okay.
Okay. So, he's killed 2 people. And the police are obviously freaking out that someone
it's a bomb, man.
Multiple bombings have been killing people. Kathy Sheets was not the intended victim. It was J. Gary Sheets, but she was the one who picked up the package off the porch. So, the following day, an explosion rocks downtown Salt Lake City. Not a very big explosion, mind you, but big enough to kill a person. Hoffman himself was severely injured in the explosion when this bomb exploded in his car.
Oh my god.
The intended recipient was a third friend who was also involved in the investment deal. He was attempting to give the bomb to this friend, who Hoffman knew would likely take this bomb up an elevator and walk through a very busy office floor. So he knew that a lot of people could be killed because of this. So he goes to his friend's office, checks in at the reception. Reception says, your friend isn't here. So he goes back out to his car, and he opens the door, and he swung the bomb to put it into the passenger seat. He bumped the gear shift with it. And bumping the gear shift with a mercury switch bomb was enough to set it off.
Oof.
And it blew up in his hand. His right hand, his forger's hand.
Jeez.
He lost several fingers.
Good.
He was blown out of his car. Actually, if he had shut the door before he'd done this, he would have probably been killed because of the force of him hitting the door would have killed him. But he was thrown from the car several feet. So he is now directly connected to the bombings. Hoffman quickly became the prime suspect in the bombings. Police discovered evidence of the forgeries in Hoffman's basement. The motive was not ascertained until 6 months after he was arrested for the bombings. The whole bombing plot was a cold-blooded effort to save his own skin and buy time from his buyer.
Wow.
Yeah. Can you believe it? The whole thing is so complicated. It took police 6 months to figure it all out.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. It's a long
investigation, and I'm sure there was so much evidence at all the bombing sites and in Hoffman's house, and it was just a huge mess.
Yeah.
And terrifying. Luckily, the bomber had been stopped. Hoffman was arrested for murder and for forgery. He was arrested for forgery in February 1986. So it did take him several months to figure it all out, for sure. In January of 1987, so a year later, he pled guilty to second-degree murder and theft by deception to avoid the death penalty, confessing his forgeries in open court. And in January 1988, he was sentenced to life in prison, where he sits to this day.
What a dick.
Yep. In 1988, right after he got into prison, before the Utah Board of Pardons, Hoffman confessed that he thought planting the bomb that killed Kathy Sheets was, quote-unquote, almost a game. At the time I made the bomb, my thoughts were that it didn't matter if it killed Mrs. Sheets, a child, a dog, whoever was killed. Within the hour, the parole board, impressed by Hoffman's callous disregard for human life, decided he would serve his entire natural life in prison.
Good.
Yeah. Because, obviously, he doesn't give a crap if he murders people.
Oof.
After Hoffman was imprisoned, his wife filed for divorce.
Good for her.
Yeah, seriously, go Dora
Good
Lee.
for her.
Dora Lee. Yeah, good for her. Dora Lee Olds.
Oh, poor
Hoffman.
Dora Lee.
Yeah, can you imagine being one of his kids, too?
No.
Again, that sphere of victimhood. After the divorce, Hoffman attempted suicide in his cell by taking an overdose of antidepressants. He was revived, but not before spending 12 hours lying on his injured right arm, blocking its circulation and causing muscle atrophy. In a case of poetic justice, his forging hand was thereby permanently disabled, and he can no longer use his right hand.
Yeah, sucks to suck, man.
Sucks to suck. You win shitty games.
You play shitty games,
you play
win
shitty games.
Prizes.
You win shitty prizes, like losing your arm.
Yep. Couldn't have happened to a nicer person.
Right?
Yeah.
He's a monster.
Yep.
He is a robot who cares nothing for anyone else.
Yeah, well, I still can't get over the white salamander.
Right? Can you imagine that?
I mean, that is just blowing my mind.
That's Valerie Mindblowers.
I think I lost like a couple brain cells listening to it.
Maybe a year or two off your life.
I'm trying to think of how people ever believed it. Like,
yeah. Well, yeah, and there's photographs and video footage of the church leadership talking about it and stuff. It's all very well recorded and documented.
Jeez.
With many reports alleging secrecy and cover-up on the part of LDS general authorities, lots of writers draw attention to how a culture that rests on a found scripture is particularly vulnerable to the offerings of con artists.
Yeah.
According to the Ostlings, who wrote a book on the subject, The Hoffman forgeries could only have been perpetrated in connection with the mysterious mixture of paranoia and obsessiveness with which Mormons approach church history. There are a lot of Mormons are very into church history.
Yeah, they are.
Love reading about it. There's even like historical fiction about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very big deal to a lot of them, and it's a very dramatic beginning to the church. And so they spend a lot of their time in life looking into it and looking into their relatives and ancestors and that sort of thing. So,
well, like, some of that is cool, but like,
it's cool to know your history.
Thing, like, I like that. Yeah, I
Absolutely.
like to know like my family heritage and stuff like that, and that's cool. And even like, I worked at Starbucks as my first job years ago. And it was cool to learn about the company history when I was there, you know, because it's interesting, and that's what you're involved in, and what the people around you are involved in, and so it is interesting to know.
Part of the culture you're involved in.
Just don't understand how people get so wound up about it.
Yeah.
And I know that has been a huge thing throughout all of human history. I just don't understand it at all.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's part of the whole wanting to be part of something bigger than yourself thing, in my opinion. And sometimes it gets completely out of hand.
Yeah. And I guess pair that with a nice case of narcissism, and you have a recipe for a bomb.
Absolutely. The lasting effect of the entire Hoffman thing turned into a systemic religious version of the Streisand effect. Do you know the Streisand effect?
Mm-mm. Streisand as in Barbara
Streisand, yeah.
Interesting.
You might know it better by Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. When you ban something,
that just makes people want it more.
It skyrockets the popularity.
Yeah, that totally reminds me of Harry Potter. That was a better reference for me. Thank
well, that's when I was reading the Streisand effect. I'm like, oh, obviously that's from Harry Potter. It's where the Quibbler gets banned from Hogwarts. So that makes sure everyone in Hogwarts is reading it.
Yup. Interesting. So now everybody's read some of these letters. Is that what
it's
like a huge thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. Hoffman had emboldened many scholars to penetrate deeper and deeper into recesses of the Mormon past that its most conservative leaders would want left unexplored, and it was unlikely that Mormon church leaders would ever be able to fully contain the fires of intellectual curiosity that Hoffman had helped fan. So in a weird way, he kind of pulled it off.
Yeah.
If he pulled off his criticism of the church,
bit, yeah.
Even by being a fake, it's kind of it's interesting.
It is interesting.
It's kind of one of those, like,
I wonder for sure, like, what a lot of people feel about it, knowing that they're faked and that kind of thing, because I know the church also, tells people not to partake of things that are against the church at all.
Yeah, it's one of the temple recommend questions that says, do you believe in it? Do you support or believe in anything that essentially anti-church groups believe?
Yeah, and even though, like, his documents so much weren't anti-church, because that was the point. He was. So I wonder if they're, like, I don't know if they're discouraged from reading what he
forged. I think they don't really care so much anymore, because Hoffman kind of tarnished his own legacy with the whole murder thing. So
interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, but it did create kind of a, hey, what did really happen though?
It sure as fuck wasn't a white salamander.
It definitely wasn't a white salamander. I can pretty much guarantee that.
One day when I die, if there is any kind of an afterlife and it is a white salamander,
you can eat crow.
Then I'll probably die again. But
your heart will stop.
Yeah, I'll go to the afterlife.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's a big stretch, and it's kind of what started the whole spiral for Hoffman. So it is very interesting tale.
Well, I'm Valerie.
And I'm Jack. And this is Below the Salt.